Hi everybody, welcome to this latest Bristol University Press webinar, Disabled People's Innovation for Inclusive and Participatory Social Policy. It's great that you're here. My name is Navin Kikamai and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar. Before I begin, I would like to outline the programme itself and do some housekeeping. So in terms of the programme, we will have an introduction by myself, just very short introductions. I will briefly make mention of the panelists we have today. And then each of the panelists will get approximately 6 minutes to make a statement about the issues. And then we will have space for question and answers. It's important to remember that as you engage with the question and answers session, that you insert your point you're making, maybe your question, into the question and answers function. We have closed captions enabled on this webinar. There's a button at the bottom of your screen, CC, live transcript. Please use this to show or hide text as you prefer. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat function and let us know. There are a couple of panel panelists who have published with Policy Press, and details of how to order books at a 50% discount will be available, and that information will also be shared on the chat function too. And you can use the code 50participation as at the checkout to gain discount on those sources. A recording of the webinar will be available after the event. So let's begin. So as we have been aware, acknowledged and recognised, the disabled people's movement has been central and pioneering in developing participatory public and social policy internationally, building on diversity of disabled people's own ideas and experience to develop new inclusive and accessible ways and effective challenges to marginalisation and discrimination. Simultaneously, there have been competing agendas of neoliberal ideology, new emerging spaces of segregation and exclusion, market-driven forces that have resulted in cuts in public services and the crisis in welfare systems and social care have again threatened disabled people's rights to independent and interdependent living and support and full citizenship. I'm also at this point delighted to introduce our panelists who will each get 6 minutes to present their point. We have Peter Beresford, Colin Cameron, Hannah Morgan, Sonali Shah, Damian Milton and Gemma Roberts. Information about their biographies will be made available, and if you so wish, you can follow these up later. So let's begin. So I'm going to pass over to Peter Beresford, who will have approximately 6 minutes. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Navin. Good to be here. Hello, everybody. So our focus today is on participatory social policy. What's interesting historically is that social policy, as both a discipline and political practice, has shown only limited interest in disability issues and particularly disabled people. That's why separately disability studies, international associations of disability studies, and major international disability studies conferences and events and journals have all developed and mushroomed. So we need majorly to reconnect social policy with disabled people and disability issues. The result of this unhelpful disconnect in the UK, for instance, are some of the most harsh, cruel, inadequate, destructive and unjust disability policies internationally, particularly in relation to welfare benefits and social care. I believe that the disabled people's movement has a particular contribution to make through its advancing participatory social policy, and that's what I want to focus on today. For truly participatory social policy, we must be our own intellectuals. The disabled people's movement has been an exemplar of this, like the women's movement before it, building our own knowledges, our own lived experience, our own theories and models, notably the social model of disability, which has transformed understanding. We have all a part to play in this as disabled people, drawing on the diversity of our experiential knowledges to challenge traditional non-disabled understandings, assumptions, and prescriptions. Disabled people have also made a unique contribution to participatory social policy because of our need for an accessible environment or accessible environments, accessible communications, and ways of doing things that enable full inclusion rather than perpetuating barriers, inequalities, and exclusions. The progress we've made, although there's still much more to be done, is in my view breathtaking. There's no excuse now for excluding any disabled person for any supposedly impairment-related reason. Such exclusion is simply discriminatory, not necessarily the way it's actually working. Third, the disabled people's movement has made real progress on intersectionality, appreciating that any group includes people who face other discriminations on grounds of race, ethnicity, sexuality, age, gender, culture, class, and so on. Shaping Our Lives, the disabled peoples and service user organisation in which I'm involved, has recently undertaken projects focusing on the way in which, for example, disabled women experiencing domestic abuse and disabled people in traveller, gypsy and Roma communities face additional barriers and problems accessing support and living independently and interdependently, and what needs to be done about that. Work like this, I'm saying, offers major insights for truly transformative and intersectional participatory social policy, also insights for unifying our different struggles, our overlap and movements, our overlapping agendas and disempowerments, for our learning to make creative progress, advancing participatory social policy as both practice and discipline to come together. We all have a part to play in this, in mainstream social policy, in disability studies, and as disabled and non-disabled people, building new alliances, new social model understandings on the basis of equality. I hope today's discussion represents a further marker along this road. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Peter. And I turn my attention to Colin Cameron. Hi, Colin.
Hi, Navin. Thank you. And thank you, Peter. The question we were asked initially in preparing these sessions was, what do you think are some of the most important innovations disabled people have pioneered for different participatory policy and practice? And you can't get bigger, you can't get more important, you can't get more significant than what Peter's mentioned already, which is the social model. And so I want to start off by drawing attention to definitions. The social model gives a different understanding of what disability is to the traditional medical model. And I think it's kind of core, very important to be clear what we're talking about here. I've recently examined a PhD candidate who didn't clarify what she was talking about and used some of the medical model sometimes and social model other times, and she got herself into a terrible mess. It is so important to be clear about what we are talking about when we talk about the social and the medical model. The medical model can be is expressed within the 2010 Equality Act definition of disability, which says you are disabled if you have a long-term impairment that has a substantial and long-term negative effect on your ability to do normal day-to-day activity. So within the medical model definition here, disability is a characteristic, embodied characteristic. It can only be experienced negatively within this definition, and as a departure from normality. Disability can only be measured within model terms as abnormality. We switch for the sake of time to social model, which identifies disability as the loss. The definitions here come from Disabled People's International, 1981. Disability is identified as the loss or the limitation of opportunities to take part in the normal life of the community on an equal level with others due to physical and social barriers. In other words, and in the words of UPIAS, the Union of Physically Segregated Against Segregation, disability is a form of social oppression. It is one or the other. It is a physical characteristic which can only be experienced negatively and as abnormality, or it is social oppression. It can't be a bit of both. Now, the social model formed, you know, we're going back by 3 decades now, 3 or 4 decades, formed the bedrock of it was the big idea which underpinned the activity of the disabled people's movement, which was campaigned during the 80s, the 90s into the present century by developing and we saw countless really local organizations of disabled people being set up, being established, growing and working. We saw coalitions of disabled people working with local councils, to influence issues on housing, education, public transport, leisure opportunities. We saw centres for inclusive living, campaigning for direct payments and the right to take control over people's own rights and choices. Disability arts forums, which emerged in which disabled people developed their own narratives about their personal experience living with impairment in a disabling society. Organizations like Disability Equality in Education and the Alliance for Inclusive Education, the Direct Action Network, and all these organizations were rooted. This movement was rooted within this idea that disability is about oppression. It is about the way in which people with impairments are systematically excluded from the mainstream and from the same opportunities as everyone else. Now, you know, we did have all of these organizations, and for many complex reasons we can't go into here, these have disappeared or they've been slimmed down greatly within the past 20 years. The publication by Shaping Our Lives and by Shaping Our Lives, looking at the disappearance of DPO's Disabled People Organisation over the past 10 years, as a result largely of austerity policies and cuts, as Peter described, and cruel cuts to disabled people, benefits and welfare services. Access is no longer guaranteed in the way we were moving towards back in a couple of decades ago, and also I would know. I'll miss that comment because I'm aware of the need to move on. I was going to make it. Well, no, never mind. So yes, we no longer have the powerful disabled people grounded within the social model that we used to have, but we still have the disabled people. There's a voice. It is a voice that persists, that won't go away, that will not be silenced. Within, I suppose my point, within the university sector, there's in which I work, there's currently an awful lot of talk about disability and inclusion, a lot of talk about diversity and inclusion, and a lot of bodies, a lot of networks, a lot of organized, a lot of groups being set up to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk about disability and welcoming and recognizing the importance of diversity. But for so long as this is rooted, this discussion is rooted within medical model perspectives, as long as it takes that Equality Act definition that disability is something unfortunate, something negative you have, it's the result of illness, then movement won't happen very quickly. Well, in fact, all we're going to have is talk, no action. Now, I was very encouraged last week to read a message coming around Northumbria University where I work.
Colin, could you please just
yes.
1 minute?
Okay, from Simon Newitt, who's organising a new staff disability network, in which he says that we are committed to identifying and removing disabling barriers within the university. He also states that Northumbria University holds by the social model. I would question that, given the way that disabling barriers and assumptions are absolutely institutionalized within the details of everyday life. But what I'm saying is that this is encouraging. We need to hold on to, and we need to promote the social model, and organizations need, if they want to make inclusion real, they need to listen to disabled people. Sorry for going over.
Thank you very much, Colin. Over to you, Hannah.
Thanks very much, Naveen. And I think, Colin, I'm going to be drawing on an awful lot of what you've already been saying. I took as my starting point for thinking about today a kind of a reflection on where things have moved and how they've changed over a period of time. I've recently changed jobs and come back to the University of Leeds, where I studied as an undergraduate, and it was there, actually in a politics seminar, that I talked to a student who was doing a disability studies module with Colin Barnes. That led to me knocking on his door and doing the Masters in Disability Studies. And that sort of set in train a fascinating, engaging, challenging engagement with disabled people's ideas and the disabled people's movement. And so I've been thinking, reflecting about how those big ideas have transformed my own practice and the ways in which we can work collaboratively, particularly as academics, to practice in a different way, holding on very clearly to Colin's comments that the disabling barriers remain strong within higher education. I think sometimes that's obscured too much. And I reflected back to reading very early on as a student Liz Crow's work and her talking about how she discovered the social model. I think she describes it in kind of Road to Damascus terms, in terms of this very, very strong transformation of her ideas. I think my conversion to the social model was perhaps a little bit less dramatic than that, but I don't think it was any less transformational. And I think it's very important to acknowledge what a privilege and a pleasure it's been to work alongside with and learn from disabled people, and also to have the opportunity to use that knowledge and the challenges that knowledge brings in the work I've been doing with social work and social care students and practitioners over the last 20 years. And I think the biggest change that I've seen, and this I think reflects the point you were making, Colin, is that the social model and independent living aren't fringe ideas anymore. they're more radical, I think, than people will care to admit, but they are now centre stage. And I think that's testament to both their intrinsic power as ideas, but also to the work that disabled people's movement has done to push them and hold them there. And again, I think we underestimate that work and that maintenance that's required by the disabled people's movement. But I think the crux of today's session really is on how these hard-won developments are increasingly precarious and how we can work collectively and in solidarity to maintain and hopefully advance those ideas and those concepts. Because I think one of the wonderful simplicities of both concepts often belies a much more complex and challenging nature in terms of their application. It's very easy, Colin, as you said, to say you're a social model organisation. It is much, much more challenging to be one, and we should be honest about that and not pretend it is a simple, straightforward thing. And I think often we see a kind of a ritualised or a mimicking use of those language, or the application of the language of the social model, often reduced to slogans. We talk, barriers, choice, control, all individually good, but also problematic, particularly when they're viewed in such a reductionist way. And I think there's often a sense that if you call something an independent living service, a social model university, that somehow it is so, and clearly that's just not the case. And we've got a growing body of evidence collected in part by the people involved in this seminar that demonstrates the damaging ways in which independent living often is utilised in service provision. So I'm just going to cut a little bit out because I'm very conscious of time. I suppose I also wanted to acknowledge how frustrating it is, and both Peter and Colin have made this point, to see that much of the innovation that's been developed by disabled people's organisations, and those very organisations themselves, being squeezed by austerity cuts, and particularly the marketisation of those innovations, often usurped by non-disabled people's organisations. And I often reflect that Mike Oliver called the social model a hammer. Excuse me, I mean, it was very much a practical tool. He was very clear it was a practical tool for effecting change. But I think there's a great deal of work that needs to be done to demonstrate how much more nuanced some of those ideas are than perhaps a blunt instrument can achieve. Simply talking about the social model isn't always enough. We've seen it isn't enough in our organisations. And so I think a second wonder of both the social model and independent living is also a frustration. They remain a form of troublesome knowledge. They trouble us. They're difficult for us to grapple with. We remain grappling with them on an ongoing basis. I don't think any of us have got to a point where that stops, and that's a wonderful thing. I recognise Colin's example of students who move between models. I can read social work students' essays where they talk about a medical model for this, a social model for that, as if somehow they are different approaches you can put on and take off, rather than being a transformatory approach. So in this work, I think my work with social work students and practitioners, I think in the main they do want to embrace a social model approach and adopt independent living. I think it's right to be critical of professional practice. Disabled people's organisations have been correct in holding them to account. However, it's not generally a reluctance to take it on. Often it's a lack of skill, a lack of opportunity, and a lack of innovative opportunities, and particularly in opportunities to engage directly with the writing of the disabled people's movement. So I think there's real potential in engaging professional allies, and I think it remains a relatively untapped potential. And I think it would be really good to think about how we can better enable practitioners and other workers to engage directly with these ideas and with the knowledge of the disabled people's movement throughout career, rather than seeing it as a brief period of learning. We introduced you to the social model, off you go, somehow that's going to be fine. So I suppose to conclude, we're in challenging times, but I often go back to early social model writers. I find that really helpful and inspiring. Mike Oliver summarised independent living in the UK, which is very different to how it's sometimes interpreted elsewhere, as, and this is a quote, entailing collective responsibilities for each other and a collective organisation. Independent living isn't about individual empowerment, it's about individuals helping one another. And I think the simplicity of statements like that should remain a touchstone for us, and particularly for professionals. And I'm very keen to have conversations about how we can work with professionals and other practitioners to enable more inclusive and accessible practice, but also how we can hold them to account in that context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Echo lots of sentiments that has already been mentioned through Colin and Peter, but thank you. Sonali. I believe we're going to have a change of screen, and Sonali's going to be using a PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you, thank you. There'll be two of us speaking just now. Again, I'm going to just talk about quickly the use of personality in research and practice. And as Peter and Hannah have said, disabled people's voices are vital to social change, and our understanding of society has been enriched by this evidence.
However, it is important to reconnect the individual experience of disability with its social context, because using personal narratives on their own can be said to be voyeuristic and fail to present much valuable information beyond the individual about the impact of social structures. This is not to demote the importance of disabled people's narratives, as we know they have been the foundation of the disabled people's movement, and political claim nothing about us without us. But if disabled people's lives are the sole purpose of the research, it becomes depoliticized.
So it's different from an ontological shift, that is a shift in assumptions about the nature of disability itself, so away from the social, more towards the individual, which is what the medical model is based on. So this is why the biographical turn is important.
A reaction against the positivistic domination grounded in social research, which emphasizes the role of individual subjectivity and human agency in social life, the turn explores what C. Wright Mills refers to as the sociological imagination.
So that the study of biography, history, and the problems of the intersection with social structure, that's the core concern. So also, why are personal narrative important then? So many policies exist in the neighbourhood disability, the Equality Act, the National Disability Strategy, the UNCRPD, but what impact does it have on disabled people's lives?
So personal narratives are essential as evidence of the long-term impact of macro and meso policies and practices on disabled people's lives in different spaces and times. E.g.
So, for example, one of my research projects evidenced the impact of early separation in childhood and the formation of adult relationships. Yeah.
They are important for maintaining a presence for the voice of disabled people in a critical and reflexive research practice. To evidence the ways in which agency, resistance, and resilience can challenge public policies, underline how people often live their lives in spite of, rather than because of, public support and policy expectations.
And personal narratives are important to reveal the complex interaction of social and biological forces, factors that influence health trajectories of disabled people. So, for example, the assumptions of asexuality of disabled people and limited healthcare knowledge or impairment can lead to poor health behaviors and increased unmet needs, which in turn influence high risk of mortality from preventable diseases.
To generate representative biographical narratives, it's important to use inclusive research methods to enable participants to speak for themselves. This includes using appropriate theoretical frameworks like feminist disability theory?
Yeah. So feminist disability theory, that many of you know, seeks to highlight the voices and experiences that have been silenced and misrepresented, such as those of disabled women, and situate the experiences of disability within the context of rights and exclusions.
It provides a lens to understand the intersection between the female body and its social, cultural, and physical environments. Viewing the personal as political, this lens favours the personal experiences of disabled women, but as a vehicle to expose experiences of disablism and sexism in the lives of disabled women, as opposed to revealing their lives experiences as women with CP.
So it also enables disabled people to express themselves, participate, and communicate in ways that are accessible to them.
Authors such as Rios et al. And Eisen point out that the adoption of overly rigid recruitment and data collection instruments could exclude some disabled people from becoming active research participants. Their work shows that time and resource constraints and limitations in research knowledge and flexibility can deter researchers from involving disabled people, including those with associated speech impairments in health and social care research.
So the use of digital technologies brings the flexibility to the research process, overcoming time, resource, and geography constraints. So it also enables people with certain impairment effects to participate in interviews and speak for themselves in a way that would not be possible with traditional methods that do not offer flexibility in time.
Email and IM conversations put some distance between the participant and the researcher, which was more comfortable for some women when disclosing personal information to a stranger.
So just for clarification, IM is instant messenger on Facebook. So quickly, lastly, some of my research has highlighted 3 benefits of using digital methods with disabled people.
Having the time and space to reflect on and tell their own stories in their own words.
So these are just quotes for my participants, and you can read them at your will. So secondly, communicating personal and sensitive topics, so about sexual health, domestic violence, etc. People often feel it less embarrassing to talk over email or Facebook. And then thirdly, making interviews easier for people with non-normative speech patterns to be understood. Again, the last Poppy said, can you read Poppy?
Because my speech is sometimes very difficult for strangers to understand, and the sheer effort and time it takes to ensure that I've been properly understood is both exhausting and extremely frustrating.
Therefore, email or IM is preferred. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonali. Very thought-provoking, very important. I turn attention to Damian. Damian?
Hello, everyone. I was having some thoughts earlier today leading up to this session about what I wanted to talk about, and I've got some slides to share in a minute. But I just in all my experience of many years, mainly working in autistic advocacy and activism and learning disability area as well, the amount of participation within an organization or institution or activity tends to have an inverse relationship with the amount of power that organization can enact regarding social change or making a difference. And so some of the least participatory organizations have been government departments, large charities, and universities, to be fair, have not been fared much better in my experience through many years of working in academia. And there's very much a hierarchical nature to these institutions, whilst grassroots disabled people's organisations tend to be much smaller in nature. And although the power they exercise is far greater than their resources in comparison. And I wanted to share with you an example, which is a group I chair. If I can just need to find my slides for with you, but this group is the called the Participatory Autism Research Collective. This is just a quote from the late Donna Williams. Right from the start, from the time someone came up with the word autism, the condition has been judged from the outside by its appearances and not from the inside according to how it is experienced. In the autism research world, it is incredibly medical model dominated. And the vast majority, near about 96, 97% of that research is on young children because it's seen as childhood developmental disorder. So there's hardly any research on adults in comparison, and hardly any at all on, say, autistic adults in later life. So the PARC group was set up by autistic scholars and activists back in 2015. And the first meeting was held in London and was basically 5 people in a room. And our aim was to build a community network where those who wanted to see more significant involvement of autistic people in research could share knowledge and expertise. And it wasn't just for research. We had no funding, no formal structure. It was just an informal network and sharing of ideas and efforts. The objectives of PARC in our first meeting were set out to address the isolation of many autistic researchers in academia, ensure that this work could be found and used and publicised a bit, raise the reputation of participatory research in the field, and also now and again critically comment on autism research, which wasn't any of these things, doing the opposite. So in order to do that, we wanted to encourage autistic people in research areas, give feedback and support, and also hold meetings and events. We set up a website, which is quite easy to find, and this has included various materials, blog posts. We've held in-person events all around the UK, and collaborated with groups in other countries as well. And since the COVID pandemic, we've been holding a lot more online events and workshops, which have been really successful and popular. It's also led to publications in academic journals and a partnership with Pavilion Press to get some of our more practical work out. But there's still sort of key difficulties. One is funding for participatory work, or the network itself, which is still unfunded 7 years later. Issues around where participatory research is still falling short. Intersectional issues, especially in autism research, is still pretty poor in terms of the kind of representativeness and diversity within it. Most autism events tend to be extremely white, in my experience, and that always disturbs me. And these areas are still progressing, and we've done a lot of work with various groups. Parks sort of combined efforts with a group called Autism Voice UK, which has tried to raise autism awareness around Black ethnic groups and so on in the UK and abroad. Yet the kind of park network has gone outside of the usual academic system and hierarchy and status games, and its power comes from that. The ability to pop up and deliver things here and there, as long as there's a building or a Zoom session that can be set up. It's championed interdisciplinarity far more than other academic events generally do. We've had some translation to practice, matching up with policy and practice related activism groups and so on, and just building that sharing supportive community, because there's very little support for this kind of work outside of it. So the biggest supporters of autistic-led and participatory research is autistic people, and those we would consider allies and people on board with the social model and neurodiversity paradigm, things like this. So much still to be done, but it's our own efforts which, despite constrained, is what makes the difference. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Damian. Thank you. Gemma, can I invite you, please, our final panellist?
Hi everyone, thanks for inviting me to this. So I'm with Greater Manchester Coalition of Disabled People, which is one of the longest running DPOs in the UK. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about DPOs and the way society was run and things like that. So one of the most important innovations disabled people have pioneered is the creation of disabled people's organisations, or DPOs. When participatory policy was at its greatest in the 70s and 80s, these organisations existed as a way of challenging the multiple power relations between welfare providers and their users. They insisted that our knowledge, lived experiences, and shared experiences needed to be central to the creation of policies and practices that directly affected disabled people. DPOs aim to facilitate the inclusion of disabled people in the design of policies via consultations or participatory means. For us, this was usually protests. They aim to achieve accountability, transparency, and active citizenship for all of the members. They believed that using a bottom-up approach would allow them to advocate and place themselves in a better position to influence specific policies. Whilst government had a large part to play in opening up the political space, creating the right conditions and setting up necessary structures to enable participatory policy making, DPOs also had a big role to play too. Their role involved raising awareness about the issues at stake, helping citizens and communities organise themselves, and advocating for more participatory policy making in the future. Throughout this period, Ken Livingstone's GLC funding was available for small community organisations to share their ideas about issues from their own perspectives. It meant DPOs like ourselves could have major influence over the policies that came from the older, more philanthropic community organisations. And what I mean by that is that these older organisations often spoke on behalf of disabled people, guessing what might be best for us. Whereas the newer community organisations were being run by us. They were directly affected by the issues. They also highlighted a lot of gross inequalities that never did seem to make it to the mainstream before this. Despite recent government cuts, these groups still do exist. GMCDP is just one of the many DPOs still operating in the UK. Many different counties, cities, towns or boroughs will have their own networks and organisations engaging with their own participatory policies. In Greater Manchester, we have the Greater Manchester Mayoral Panel, which is a combined panel between 10 different DPOs across the 10 boroughs of Greater Manchester. And it also includes the Mayor of Greater Manchester too, Andy Burnham. Here we meet and discuss what the key struggles and barriers are that all of our members are facing. And the main problem that keeps being brought up at the moment across the 10 organisations is access to the direct payments or independent living scheme. To understand what caused the scheme to get to its current state, we must think about that history I've just spoken about. Independent living was a participatory policy partly created by DPOs nationally and the disabled people involved in them. So when the government's focus was persons-centred, this all worked really well. It was a policy that promised to work bottom up, putting people first, then learning and adapting from those who were using it. Except that didn't happen. The policies surrounding disabled people's independence and control slowly started to get watered down, and the support networks that were available began to reduce. With a change of political parties and 15 years later, the narrative appears to have shifted again. We've moved away from these community-led or person-centered approaches and back to the philanthropic approach, where others get to make the decisions about our lives as disabled people. Those who were trained in social care under the old person-centered approach have now left, along with the policies that disabled people created as well. The amount of funding for DPOs to fight these has also been reduced dramatically, meaning we often, unfortunately, don't have the resources to offer all our communities the vital support they need, which I think is something all of us have touched on. Despite this, GMCDPs, supported by work from the panel, have chosen to make this a key priority for us. We have begun to collate evidence of disabled people's lived experience using independent living or direct payment schemes. And I just wanted to share a story with you from someone from Embrace Wigan and Lee, which is another DPO in Greater Manchester. So they said, I've been on a direct payment scheme for 15 years now. I felt very supported by the social care team there. They had direct payment peers that I could recruit and rely on for any questions or queries. Today, I feel like I have no support at all. All the services I used to receive have slowly been eroded over the past 10 years. In the past, I could afford to pay £2 over minimum wage. Now I struggle to even meet the minimum. This leaves me with very little choice and control over who I employ, and I have certainly seen the difference in level of care I receive. I've also noticed that local authorities will pay care providers an extortionate amount to use their services, yet they won't offer the same amount of funds to a direct payments user. On top of all this, Wigan Council have decided that I now need to pay a substantial contribution for my care. I'm very worried that I cannot afford this and will be forced into a residential setting. This is definitely not what I want. During the COVID-19 pandemic, I was told I could spend the direct payments money on anything that would make the management of my care team easier. After a formal audit, I was told that the purchase of a laptop was misuse of public funds, and I felt this was an attempt to make it look like I couldn't manage my support effectively and further the council's agenda that I needed to be in a residential setting. For us, this type of feedback certainly shows how we as a country have forgotten the history of what these participatory policies are, and we do need to reflect and understand the need for participatory and person-centred approaches now. We need some contemporary research alongside some personal experiences showing how difficult adult social care has become to navigate. GMCEP and the mayoral panel are soon to release a huge online survey aiming to gather as many views as possible from disabled people. It should be ready mid-June, and I'll share this with the organisers of today's event, but please fill this in, help people fill it in and share it with as many people as possible. The more cases we can prove that they're not just one-offs, the more armed evidence we have for them. And I think that's about everything for me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, panellists. Really thought-provoking issues and points and disturbing worries on the horizon, if not already embedded in. So really important issues we've raised, and thank you to the panellists again. We've got an opportunity now to do a question and answer session, and we've roughly dedicated 25 minutes to this particular aspect. So I do ask you, I've noticed some people have already started to pose some questions, and we'll make a head start in trying to collect some of these. So I'm going to read out the first questions, not in full, but trying to encapsulate what the key points are. Hopefully panelists have also had access to those questions. So this is a question pointed to Colin and Hannah, and I'm going to clump these three questions together, primarily about how society is organised at a larger level regarding to the social model of disability. And the specific questions, are there new forms of user-led institutions being developed or new analysis of how society works within the social model that you would point to as promising? The next question by Cara, can you please talk about the disabled people's movement is currently engaging with policymakers to get social model embedded into policy? And third question by Leslie about the advocates the CRPD advocates the human rights model over the social model. How can we reconcile and apply these two models? So principally to Hannah and Colin. So Hannah, can I invite you first of all?
Yeah, I'm just sorry, rereading the question because it's hard to keep up with quite so many. I think it is frustrating that the models continue to be mixed up and treated as equivalents. And I suppose that means there is work for those of us in disability studies to work harder at making that distinction. I've always found it's helpful to talk about individual and social models and try and separate out the medical. That seems to make life a little bit simpler because you can practice medicine from a social model perspective. So it's, often I find students in particular find that distinction helpful. I also think it's about engaging with the disabled people's movement and disability studies more broadly. I mean, Gemma made the point about history being forgotten, that institutional memory shifts really, really quickly. And unless we maintain kind of or keep the roots of those ideas fresh, it's going to be very difficult. And there is, I think, both benefit in going back to the classics, if you want, but also there's really interesting ongoing work. I mean, Sonali's talked about her work. There's lots and lots of examples of really innovative, creative research that's been undertaken, often in partnership and often co-produced by disabled people's organisations. And it's about, I think, thinking collectively and collaboratively about how we more effectively bring that into the public domain, and how we ensure that those voices are heard above some of the more dominant, louder voices.
Thank you, Hannah. Colin.
Turn my speak on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was in time to write down the first two questions might have to remind me. But the first question, are there new forms of analysis being developed? I think we've heard, as Hannah said, I think we've heard quite a lot in the talks that have been part of this session, particularly in terms of what Sonali was saying about the importance of making links between personal experience and the shaping of that personal experience by oppressive social structures and by unequal social relationships. The way that the life as it is lived is always lived in a social context, and we make ourselves, but not in circumstances of our own choosing, and that is such an important kind of thing to be emphasizing, and I think in many ways that kind of addresses some of the work that Sonali's doing, addresses some of the points made, or some of the debates within disability studies made particularly by disabled feminists. But thinking as well of the work Gemma's talking about, the EMCDP is doing in getting the personal accounts of disabled people from the five boroughs of Manchester, linking those, making those voices heard, and setting that within a social context. I always think back to that old bag, Mrs. Thatcher, and the way she said, there's no such thing as society. There are only individuals and families. You know, Mrs. Thatcher talked a lot of crap, but that was one of the stupidest remarks she ever made. People's lived experience is always set within social context, and the research which works to make clearer those links as a basis for the development of social and public policy is so important. The work Damian was talking about too. The second question, try and be very quick about how to make sure the social model thing implemented into policy. You know, it's an old question. It's an old paradox or conundrum how we do this. At Northumbria University, we have to do mandatory training exercises so that everyone in the university is complied with blah blah blah. And I've refused to do my mandatory training until the equality and diversity training package dispenses with the medical model, or makes clear that it is written within terms of the medical model. Now, there must be thousands, I don't know how many thousands of staff at Northumbria University. I seem to be the only one person to have done this and say, look, this is unacceptable. You say the university believes in the social model, yet within this mandatory training, the individual model is there. It underlies all thought. So answer the question is we bring about change by slowly and pathetically slowly sometimes, but it comes down to comes down to individual people and people coming together to make to make their voices heard, make their views heard, to say we have had enough. I mean, coming back to social model. It identifies disability as oppression. It's an oppressive social relationship. How do we deal with oppression? As Gemma was saying, we oppose it, we demonstrate against it. We say, no, we are not putting up with this anymore.
Thank you so much, Colin and Hannah. Thank you for the comprehensive response. There was a link between the question, but we'll pick up on that Leslie's question in a moment. I'm sure the other panelists will pick this up about how the social model fits within not just the UNCRPD, but how it fits with the human rights model. But again, I'll return to that point. I just want to turn to my next two panelists, Sonali and Damian, to really respond to these next three areas. And the first one is by Pauline, who's really talking about the Scottish Government and their approach to policy, people-led policy, she suggests. And again, a specific question about involvement. And she asks, while we have campaigned for lived experience to be at the heart of public policy, how empowering can this be when it is not run by our own disabled people's organisations? And she makes reference to particular groups, and in this particular question, it would be good to respond to that. So again, while we have campaigned for lived experience to be at the heart of the public policy, how empowering can this be when it is not run by our own disabled people's organisations? The next question is Antoinette, and I completely agree. And the question is about the media in research, social media in research, and yet a lot of academic colleagues really are very scathing about its use. How can we change this? And finally, Christine's put the importance of language and to the panel. So I want to put those three particular areas to Sonali and Damian. So can I invite Sonali to respond to those, please?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, Pauline about the campaigning for lived experiences. So I guess a lot of work is in collaboration with disabled people's organisations and disabled people themselves. So if that collaboration exists, we will ensure that social change will happen. Again, going back to my presentation, we have to be representative and not only go for the loudest voices. That kind of people who make the most noise. So you need to use particular methods and methodologies to ensure everyone has a say and everyone's experiences are represented in that collaboration. I don't know if that understood. And a collective experience is the most empowering. So collectively, we can bring about social change.
Thank you, Sonali. Damian, I just wonder whether you could speak to the other questions amongst those three. Something about the importance of language as well as personal narrative, as Sonali had mentioned.
I mean, I'd like to say a little bit on the first one as well.
Yeah, okay, please, yeah, please.
Of
course.
Because I very much can relate to issues with tokenistic consultations.
Yeah.
It's very common and tends to be the way government departments run things, especially health and social care type. Participation tends to be expert by experience panels, handpicked by people already running the activity. In the autism world, it tends to be clinicians that lead it, psychiatrists and so on. And it's very difficult really to break this, but even token gestures are better than nothing at all. So one person in a room is not great when you've got 20 other people to contend with, but being in the room is better than not being, and you can upset the apple cart somewhat and use that sort of foot in the door type thing. But it doesn't really lead to meaningful change, and it's what we really need to change is that handpicking of individuals rather than DPOs are often not represented, not even asked. People are cherry-picked, and they need to be the ones leading the activities rather than clinicians and so on. And so there's a real power shift that needs to happen in how those things are organised. In terms of language use, I do think it's a very important issue, but I wouldn't want to be a kind of language policing too much either, because I've seen too many things like this is the right way to speak about autism or this is the wrong way. And you need some leeway of people's personal histories and culture and so on, and understandings in the language they use, but also be aware of the harm it does in the way it frames people's thinking and discourse. And so just the other day, I was reading some new module outlines a colleague had written. And they had used the phrase in autism. So employment, blah, 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 practices in autism. What on earth does that mean? You mean autistic people? You know, this in autism, this made me wince, this kind of clinical language. And this is colleagues of mine writing module specs. It's like, can we do something about this? Because it's reflective of that deeper medical, psychological, individualizing model of disability, and it's so rife.
Thank you. Thank you, Damian. Thank you, Sonali. I'm conscious of time, but I also want to ensure that the next series of questions posed to Peter and Gemma. And I wonder if you could speak to these, Peter and Gemma. So the first one for you is by Alison, really pondering as to how to capture the personal narrative from people who may not be as articulate about their own personal experiences, and ensure that that within participatory research that their voices are heard. The second question for you is from Leslie about social policy, inclusion in social policy, and the best way to combat issues of guardianship and capacity, something that Gemma mentioned in her presentation earlier. And within this, suggesting examining this in the Swiss, Leslie's examining this within the Swiss citizenship law. And a question by Colin, directed at me, but I'm happy for you to take this. I'm certainly happy to respond. About disabled people's movement going to accept neurodiversity, neurodivergent people, and those experiencing mental health and trauma issues as also as highly sensitive and spiritual souls. So something about neurodiversity. So I'm going to pose those three questions to Peter and Gemma, and I'll invite Peter to go first.
Well, that should be quickly done in 30 seconds. I'm going to be a bit humble on this. I think one thing I have to say in relation to social policy and inclusion, I think we would have to be a bit obscurantist, which is an obscuring word itself, not to acknowledge to ourselves that in this country, let alone internationally, let alone in the global south, we are living in unbelievably terrible political times, which are anti-democratic. You mentioned the word neoliberal, where the whole thrust of politics is to conflict both domestically between us, forcing people to feel hatred to each other, to other people, including disabled people, and where the say that we have in policies is minimal. I don't feel we live at the present in England, at least, and at times I feel that of the effects on the whole of the UK in what can be called a democracy. And I think we're seeing that with the appalling business that's been going on with leadership in our society, formal leadership. So I think we have to think about how we achieve change. The lesson I've learned over my career of seeking involvement is that the changes we can really make are within ourselves and how we see the world, and they can be changes that do transform the world. Every movement, from the Black civil rights, the women's movement, all of them have evidenced that. And it's important for us as disabled people to remember that was always part of the brief of the organizations like that organization with a very proud heritage that Gemma's part of. So I don't think at the moment we can realistically talk about influencing social policy unless we're taking a kind of Daily Mail view of making it even more hostile rather than supportive, because that's what social policy has become. It's become a means of control, rationing, and nastiness. It's anti-social policy.
It's cruel.
But we should be developing our thoughts for the future and our political strategies to try and make that happen. And I think it's our movements which will take that forward. And I mean all the different overlapping movements. That's why when I spoke, I did end by arguing the importance of us building links between our different movements, as well as acknowledging in a stronger way intersectionality. As for personal narratives, what fascinates me is how our individual narratives can become collective narratives. And I don't like the notion of inarticulacy, of that. Shaping our lives has always involved alongside on equal terms as best we can, seeking hard to do it properly, people with learning difficulties. And I've never found that a lack of clarity is what comes from people who have language to use or views to express even beyond language. It's about listening to the complexity of what they've got to say, and two, acting on it. So let's not say it's about people can't say things. We all can say things in different ways, and we need to do more listening. And sometimes I'm afraid we metaphorically have to be doing a bit more shouting as disabled people.
Thank you, Peter. Gemma.
Yeah, I think Peter touched on a lot of what I was going to cover regarding sort of the inclusion of social policy and stuff like that. I think just to add a bit more about the personal narrative as well is I recently and also it'll probably cover the question about neurodivergency as well. So I've recently started with GMCEP working with young people age 15 to 25. Some of them have great communication skills, some of them don't. So it's really difficult to actually manage that group and to make everybody feel they're on an equal level of communication. However, through a lot of stuff that we have been doing with them, we've got to know the people individually, provided one-to-one support, got to know their speech patterns, got to know, we've got cue cards, we have fidget toys, we have whatever it is that keeps them in that very moment at that time. That is what we provide for them, and we pay for that as an organisation because that is their access needs and that is their access costs. So we will pay for anything they need to keep engaged in that conversation. A lot of the times, one of the young people who I work with in particular, who does have communication problems, to get his story and his view across, I will sit and talk to him on the phone for an hour or two. And he is a neurodivergent person, so he has tangents that he will go off on quite a lot, but I let him go on those tangents and we talk about those tangents, and then we say, okay, so back to this now, what do we talk about now? And sometimes, yeah, it can mean you plan an hour for this conversation and it goes for 2 hours, but that is his need, you know. So that is part of the way we would get those kind of views across. Anybody who couldn't access anything digitally, we also make sure we phone them. We have different accessible formats available for people, Braille, easy read, large print. You know, if you don't understand the information that's being given to you, then you're not going to probably respond to that information. So check, is there any access needs you have first before you even start an interview process? Is there anything I can do that will make this easier for you? We have, for the group, the young people's group, we have a WhatsApp group, and we all message each other when things are either not going the way we want, or we need to get our voices heard a bit louder. And again, that's just a really good way for them to sort of get involved with that. And to respond to the neurodivergent people question, I think the disabled people's movement in general has got quite a way to go with that, but we certainly are very much enjoying our neurodivergent company at the moment, and there is a lot that we need to learn from them as a community, from different, you know, neurodivergent groups and autism groups and things like that. However, I feel like there's this, certainly in our organisation, there's a new way of thinking in our organisation where we just say, do you identify as being disabled by society? If the answer is yes, welcome, come to GMCDP. This is what we do. You know, that is our first question. Do you self-identify as being disabled by society? Great, we've got you. You know, they're the kind of things that we need all the disabled people's movement to be saying and thinking about as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody, panelists. Folks, we've got to that time, and I really do want to give panelists the final say round, and I'm going to go into reverse order on this occasion. So, Gemma, can you just give us a 1 minute summary of some of the key points in terms of the title of this particular webinar about the innovation for inclusive participatory social policy? If there are any key messages you'd like our audience to take away.
Yeah, so the key message I'd like everyone to take away is, I think the most innovative thing of participatory policy is community organisations, whether that's a disabled persons organisation, an ethnic minority organisation, LGBT organisation. Please get involved in those. Collective activism is far more powerful than individual activism, and this is the real way in which we can see policies and a person-centred approach hopefully coming back again. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. Thank you very much. Damian.
I'm not sure
key messages.
How to summarise it all, but more of a message of action required. I think social care for those with very high support needs, such as my son, who be classed as largely non-speaking autistic person with severe learning disabilities. We need far, far better. I mean, I've been fighting for a couple of years to get somewhere half adequate to meet his needs as a young adult now. And it's not good enough, basically. The practice models, the structures, the culture, to me, it's a huge area in need of change, and so many abuses happening. We need to collectivise and make it change, please.
Thank you, Damien.
Call to arms.
Yeah, call to arms. Thank you so much, Damien. Sonali. Sorry, you've got your microphone off.
Sorry. I guess it's the key message is to collaborate with disabled people from beginning to end. So from conception to production, from designing the questions, the method, the recommendations, etc. Just working together, really.
Thank you so much, Sonali. Much appreciated. Hannah, over to you.
The first thing I wrote down was we all have a part to play, Peter said, and I think that's really important to think about how we can utilise different elements of our community as part of co-production. And I was very struck by Damian talking about the development of Park and how that's happened organically with very little resources, but we have a lot of resource within our community. That's not to belittle the lack of funding for a second, but to kind of be hopeful and positive about what we have collectively.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Over to you, Colin.
Okay, I've been around the disabled people movement for 30 years now. It was 1992 I was first involved, and I am it's what we're saying now is exactly what we were saying 30 years ago. And in terms of social policy and public policy, it can be summed up in one word, well, which is a requirement for access. Access is what the social model is about. Access is what DMCDP's work's about. Access is what Damian's work's about. Access is what Sonali's is what Shaping Our Lives work is about. It's about creating equal access.
Thank you so much, Colin. Finally, Peter, key messages.
Both Sonali and Gemma highlighted working together. I think in our society, many people are not used to that. It feels frightening, and we are instead besieged by lying voices all around us. Even what we try and communicate with, like Facebook and Twitter, betray us in their power. I think what we should be trying to do in our different ways of communicating, for some it'll be talking, for others it'll be different, is to try and develop conversations with the people who don't have the contact with the worlds that we live in, whether we're speaking as women or as Black people, as people neurodiverse, as disabled people more generally, and break down the way that we're set against each other, because that's the cruelest, most vicious thing that dominates the worlds we live in.
Thank you so much. At this point, I just want to say thank you very much to our panellists. Sorry that we've run out of time, but I hope you as our audience have engaged and certainly be able to take away. So just to remind you, this is being recorded and will be made available. I want to say a big thank you to Bristol University Press for organising the webinar today, and of course to our speakers. On that note, I wish you farewell and an enjoyable rest of the day. Thank you so much, everybody. This webinar will now close.
Thanks, Navin.
Thank you, folks. Take care.
Thanks, Nathan.